Hi, everybody. So if you're like me, I don't have any personal experience with ultra marathons, but I'm seeing a lot of runners come into my office who are training for ultra marathons. It's becoming popular, and even right now during COVID, it's a time or an event that a lot of people can do that's a little more social distance. So this was a really great interview with Geoff Burns, who's a PhD, really smart guy, but also a really talented runner. So getting his perspective on some of the keys to training for an ultra, as well as how to recover from it, and things that we can do as medical and fitness professionals to really help our athletes get prepared for an ultra. And hearing about his race was also really fun. So a really great interview, and we hope you enjoy it. And now we'll cut to Geoff. Hi, everybody. Doug Adams here, and very lucky to be joined by Geoff Burns. We're lucky to have him on. Geoff is a postdoctoral at University of Michigan and knows all sorts of things about running, a great wealth of knowledge there, really diving into biomechanics. And not only does he know a lot about running, but he's a very good runner himself, having just come off of the JFK 50 miler, getting fifth in that race. And amongst many other accomplishments, he was fifth in 2018 at the International Association for Ultra Running World Championship. So really a fun application of science. I'm sure a lot of us like to experiment and do. So Geoff's using his knowledge for running, and just like to thank Geoff for being here.
Yeah, absolutely a pleasure. Yeah, I'm excited to unpack this stuff with you guys.
Yeah, so we got some good things going. But first, I want to hear about how the JFK 50 miler was. We're all kind of itching, not much race reports these days. So we'd love to hear how it went for you.
Yeah, starved for race action. It was a learning experience and a half. So I guess for anybody listening to this, background on me, I'm a road runner through and through. And I find I kind of have a unique spot in the ultra marathon world, because at least in the United States, we kind of think of ultra marathons as being synonymous with trail running. Whereas overseas, it's not as such. Like notably the big, and this is kind of my big competition that I gun for, is the Comrades Ultra Marathon in South Africa, is very much on the scale of the Boston Marathon here, something like that. It's enormous. It's huge. But that's a road race. And then also, my international competitions tend to be on the roads as well. So that's what through and through, I'm a road warrior. So JFK is like, is a really interesting race in that the first 15 miles are on the Appalachian Trail, which can be quite technical at points. And then the last 35 miles are on the Chesapeake and Ohio towpath along the Potomac River. And then it finishes, I think, about 8 miles on the roads. So it's kind of like 15 miles trail, 35 miles flat, even surface.
Yeah.
And so it had always struck me as a race that was kind of like maybe outside my wheelhouse, but also invited enough trail runners in that I could take on some of these guys who, dominate the trail scene on the ultra marathon front here, and see kind of how we stack up. And I, knowing nothing or not, I had never run on the Appalachian Trail before, so not completely understanding that trail, I kind of bucketed in my head. It's like, yeah, maybe that's a fair fight. Like, they have their thing for that chunk and get bruised and beat up on that, and then, go to the roads for the rest of the race. So anyways, going into it.
Yeah.
Going into it, that's kind of how I thought about it. And I knew it's like, I'm really, really, really not skilled at racing on trails. I'm just not good at it. And that's something I think we can talk about later in terms of how to prepare for these races. I think it's super important on a lot of fronts. But so I went into it knowing it was not at all my strong suit, but without knowing without knowing anything about the Appalachian Trail, and especially not having run on it, it was really hard to wrap my head around what it might do to me. So race day, going into it, I kind of bucketed in my head that, looking at the field, I kind of ranked myself about ninth going into the field, because I'd had a long period away from being able to race for about the last 2 years. So this was going to be my first kind of return to racing in a long time. And coupled with the fact that there are no races going on this year, it was not just probably the deepest ultra marathon. I mean, it was certainly the deepest race, JFK race, that they had ever assembled, but it was probably the most competitive ultra in 2020. Because you had, I mean, most of the top guys in the US wanted to come and have a shot at this. So I looked at this and said, like, okay, there's some good guys in here. If I can finish in the top 8, it's a really good day. And so I thought going into it, I knew I was going to come off the trail in the first 15 miles slower than a lot of those guys, but then maybe I could really dial into a fast road pace, because I thought I was in shape to run, like if this was 50 miles on the roads. It's hard to say, because again, this was in many ways like a very new learning experience for me to see if I still had it over that long of a distance, because you really can't simulate it in training very well. So I thought, though, based on previous workouts that I'd done, my fitness was incredible. I was really happy with it. I thought I was ready to look, on the roads to run maybe under 6-minute pace for 50 miles. So I thought, probably low 450s there. So I knew I was in really good shape, but I also knew that the Appalachian Trail was going to just like crush me. So my thought was that I could come off the trail probably 10, maybe 15 minutes behind the leaders. So I was expecting them to run high 140s, around 150 maybe, for the Appalachian Trail section for the 15 miles. And so that's a little above 7-minute pace. I expected myself to be running right around 2 hours for it. And that was just based on kind of historical comparisons. Again, I'd seen pictures and videos of it to try and kind of prepare, but wasn't sure exactly. And then thought that, okay, then I'll hit the towpath, the flats, and just dial into that, right around 6-minute pace, kind of what I would be able to sustain for a 50 miler on the road, and see how many I could reel in and see how much ground I could make up. And
one way to race, right? It's always nice to have a rabbit in front of you.
Yeah. And so I was kind of looking forward to that. And man, the trail exceeded my expectations in terms of difficulty. And that being said, maybe it's not that challenge. I mean, it's a challenging trail to run quickly on. Yeah. Maybe it's probably not. It's a combination of it being both challenging, but also me being like very below average on being able to move over it quickly. So it just destroyed my legs completely. I mean, again, for your readers, there are like, I tried to do some runs before on some single track trail sections we have around town, faster than what I was expecting to run on that to simulate it. But yeah, there are just long miles and miles stretches where it's like just big boulders that make not even like, not just like boulders stuck in the trail, but the entire trail is just a conglomeration of these rocks. And so for me, it becomes like every single step is a calculation. And I think honestly with those trails, and this is something that I've learned from watching good trail runners, is like the faster and faster you can run over those, the less and less it affects you. So you can keep that center of mass, like that efficiency going. Whereas like for me, it was just like stopping each step. And so like halfway through the trail section, my legs were already starting to get like that like tingly sore sensation of going to fatigue. And that's only like 9 or 10 miles into the race. And so by like the 14th, 15th mile where you drop down, so you like drop down the end of the trail section, you drop 1,000 feet over a mile. So it's just going down essentially cliffs. My legs were like giving out from under me. Like I had just did a bunch of Olympic lifts to failure and had like jelly legs. And so I get off the trail and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to run another mile, let alone like 35 more.
And so 35 fast ones.
Yeah. So I thought like, okay, maybe this is just like a temporary jelly leg that will like work itself out. So got on the trail and kind of dialed into my pace, and I clicked off, right around 6-minute miles for probably 10, 12 miles. And then by halfway, like right around 27 miles or so, started to go south. Like my legs were just gone. And so it then became like, oh, big time struggle to the finish, but still ended up passing a lot of people. So I slowed down quite a bit, but still was making up ground. So I came off the trail in 15th, and again came off in about, I think, 2 hours and 2 minutes, I think it was.
Pretty close to your prediction.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
My time prediction, I was right on how much it would slow me down, but I was totally wrong on how much it would like mechanically fatigue my legs.
Yeah.
So anyways, and I moved up by the end of the race to 5th place. So on the whole, I was, I like, one half of me was like really bittersweet in that it didn't properly, I feel like it didn't test this fitness that I was really proud of building.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think I kind of outperformed. I punched a little bit above my weight, against some good trail runners. So on the whole, I think it was a good day, and kind of proved to myself that after being away from a while, I'm still can suffer for 5.5, 6 hours. So that's a good sign.
Congrats. That's awesome. I mean, that's still quite an accomplishment. Like you said, it was a stacked race. So coming out 5th, and I know that I think that's a very common mentality of a road runner, right? It's like, I need to hit certain speeds to test my fitness.
Yeah.
Where a trail runner is kind of like, how did I do that day? Because the weather conditions can really have a big effect on it. There's a lot more variables with those trails. So you're not hitting specific paces, but you're improving your fitness compared to a stacked, eager crowd, which is impressive.
Yep, exactly. It's much more like trail running is almost, competitively speaking, much more like cycling in that sense that we don't have those nice, clean, like say our results have I was going to say there's internal and external validity, on road running, where you can say, like, independent of everything else, this performance means this, whereas like trail running, it's very much, it's racing on the day.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Well, there's a lot of good stuff to unpack in there, and I really, I want to really dive into maybe your training leading up to this, because you said a couple things about how you really felt that you had hit some benchmark workouts that showed you had good fitness, and knowing a little bit of your background. I know you were coming off kind of almost a 2-year hiatus for some injuries. So I would love, and I think a lot of our audience would really love to maybe get your thoughts on, if we're, as medical and fitness professionals, helping somebody prepare for an ultra, what are some of those benchmarks? What are some of the things that we should be helping our athletes get ready for a race like this, and helping them to have realistic expectations going into a race?
Yeah. So my, I guess I can give you, I followed the same training structure really that I would use to prepare for, for a road ultramarathon. And then I tweaked some of the sessions to be a bit more specific to the trail demands. So what that looks like, one of my, kind of bread and butter weekly workouts is like a long, I don't want to call it like tempo run, but it's like a sub threshold run, at, approaching marathon pace, marathon effort. So what that looks like is, like, most Saturdays I'll go out and run 25 miles. And a lot of times might treat that as a progression where you start out, much slower. And then by halfway you're, running maybe a little bit slower than marathon effort, and then closing out the last third of it at marathon effort. And then maybe some, once a month or so, extending that period right around marathon effort, to being maybe more than half of the run and finishing even faster, something like that. So
Okay.
that idea I think this applies actually maybe more broadly to um, a lot of training, whether it's a marathon or even shorter than a marathon, is that idea that like routinely doing work just a little bit faster and just a little bit slower than the efforts that you're targeting.
Yeah.
And you're kind of working different aspects of the strength speed dynamic there. So that's what kind of one of my bread and butter, weekly things is. And so the
With
speeds,
that,
yeah,
so I think important maybe note is that your marathon pace effort for something like that is going to be a significantly shorter duration. So it,
yes, it's exactly it.
you know, it, I know I do a lot by time
Yep.
versus distance. So, and this is one of the things we even talked a little bit before we got on about, hey, is there a limit of, running a certain amount of time for that distance for somebody that maybe their marathon effort is closer to an 8 minute pace?
Yep.
What would that look like?
Yeah, so that's it exactly. So like those runs for me, I'm looking at runs if I'm doing 20 to 25 miles. I'm looking at right around like 2 hours, 2 hours 15 minutes, 2 hours 20 minutes, up to 2.5. So that block of 2 to 2.5 hours
Yeah.
at sub marathon effort on average, with maybe half of it being closer to or even sometimes a little bit above. So that's the time window you're shooting. Whereas you're spot on. Whereas if that effort for somebody to run that distance would you might be looking at much longer.
And the recovery would have to be a lot longer
Yeah, exactly.
after something like that if
Yep.
they were to do marathon distance for that.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's something that I've done so much in the past that I can just read the paces and for the given effort that I'm sustaining and running those,
Yeah.
tell me a lot about where I stack up relative to my previous self. And this is another important thing for anybody listening is I think this is something that's really important to me, but I maintain consistency in a lot of the like routes that I have for these, so that I have like over time I can see benchmarks and in athletes I've worked with in the past as well. I really whenever we talk about like sessions that we're doing, I'm always like, okay, we're doing this session today. We're also going to be doing something very similar next month and then the month after that. So choose a route that you will want to repeat then that we can go do this. So I think that maintaining that kind of like, say, experimental design in the training allows us to make meaningful comparisons within ourselves as we progress. So that's a very important
The
piece.
research background. We're getting ready to team up with Geoff for some research. So love to see love to see his scientific method come out there. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's stuff that, doing that not just within a training block, but then mapped over several training blocks, you can get a really good thumb on how you are, how you're feeling. And then something else that I've also done a couple other things. One I have a lactate meter that I use on myself, and I was doing throughout the training block, just doing lactate threshold tests out on the track to see that, basically the paces that I could sustain, kind of getting fitter and fitter and fitter, which was kind of a cool piece to layer on. I've never done that before. That was new this year. But that was also something that kind of informed me that I was, it's funny because like it's useful data, but it also at the end, like it really only validates like the things that you already feel within yourself, which I guess is nice on its own. But yeah, it was kind of an external validation to the internal sensations.
That's an interesting point too. It's like use what's at your disposal, right? You can even calculate your thresholds with your watches sometimes and see how that's going. We do the Pinoe VO2 max, and we teach people where their fat max is, the point at which, and try to train them to move some of that fat max a little further down the line. So use the tools you have at disposal to help you see, hey, am I improving, and what could I be doing differently with my training?
That's it exactly. So yeah, so doing some of those kind of like bread and butter, and then the other thing is I have, you know, usually once or twice during the week I'll do some sort of session of some amount of intensity, whether it's half marathon or marathon pace intervals, or something shorter and faster, like 10K speed or faster than that even sometimes. So I have those that I structured during the week as well, and those workouts were progressing really, really well. And then I also, in order to specifically prepare for the trail stuff, I was doing some hill sessions on both grass as well as some long dirt hills we have here in Ann Arbor. And then I did a couple, what I would consider very specific long sessions to JFK, where I did there were two 50K days, which are like, you know, it was over 3 hours of running, which again, you know, I might in the build up to a race, had I had more races, I might have did an actual race, you know, a month or 6 weeks out from the race to prepare, but didn't have those. So I did, again, these two 50K sessions that were, to go back and look, they were either 2 or 3 weeks apart. But they were about, I think they were like 6 and 4 weeks out from the race maybe. But anyways, what they were was, again, have this section in that of single track here that I thought was about as close as I could get to the Appalachian Trail. It's very up and down. It's got lots of rocks throughout it. So it's tricky to run on. Unfortunately, that ended up being representative of about the best sections of the Appalachian Trail, like 10% of it. But what I did was, so this was 50K, I did 25K, which is about 15 and a half miles on this back and forth single track section, and then 25 miles out on, or 25K, 15 miles out on the road. So to kind of simulate that JFK transition. And I thought it was really, it was really helpful on two fronts. One, doing it the first time, especially the second time as well, exposed me to the distinct level of fatigue that I would have in my legs and my body coming out onto the roads. Because it certainly did not feel like I had just run, 15 and a half miles on the roads and then proceeded to run it. I could feel that I had loaded up my system with more stress. And I kind of reflected on it. I was like, that feels like I have maybe 20 to 25 miles of running in my legs at this point, moving into that road section. So it was really good to expose myself to that kind of unique stress before it, to kind of start wrapping my head around. And then it also allowed me to experiment with whether it's shoes, fueling, stuff like that. And then also the mechanical side of just trying to lock into the technical, like the pace, while on technical terrain, which is again, something that I'm not great at.
Yeah. That's almost like transitions for a triathlete. You're like practicing a transition from a bike to a run. Yeah,
exactly. So doing that, and I think one of my takeaways was like, after the race, I think I would have to do a lot more trail running for the race, like not just to prepare for that, but I just would have to get fundamentally better at trail running. Like, I don't think there are like small things that I could do it wasn't one of the, where I was doing this was like specific preparation. I think I don't have the fundamental preparation of trail running to do that. But I think had I had that, it was a good specific session. So I prepared exactly, I prepared how I wanted to. And so it was certainly a learning experience on that front. But yeah, so those are some of the ingredients that kind of helped me, get ready for it.
So it sounds like kind of a typical week, correct me if I'm wrong on this, you have a shorter, faster type interval session that you're doing. You've got a prolonged duration in the 2-hour range of like marathon intensity or sub marathon intensity that you're doing for about 2 hours. And then what does I know we've talked about this in the past. I think it's important to remember for the listeners too, especially maybe somebody that's on the newer side of preparing for an ultra, that you're probably still getting in a significant amount of easier volume, and your longest long run sounded like it wasn't much longer than 3 hours for some of this stuff.
Yep.
And I think that's interesting, because one of the things I hear from a lot of ultra people is, I need time on foot. I need to just, see what it's like to spend 5 hours types of just going for that whole time. Mm-hmm. And I've done recommendations of like, well, run for 2.5 hours and then go take a hike or get on a bike and spend some time there to reduce some pounding. So, the rest of your week, is it kind of lower intensity, getting some miles in, or like what's the rest of your week kind of look like there?
Yeah, that's it exactly. It's the rest of the days are just steady running, as slow as I need to be. Basically, as soon as a session finishes, my mind then thinks, and when I say session, I mean either one of those interval sessions or like the longer, anything that it requires some like psychological stress. And so usually there are 2 or 3 sessions a week. And so there's the longer, steadier sessions, and then the interval sessions. And so basically, as soon as one of those finishes, my mind is then thinking, what do I do? What do I need to do to be prepared for the next one? And that, what that then looks like is the next day or 2 days are just steady running. If I'm really whacked, it'll be slow. If I'm feeling good, I might cruise, but it's never going to be more than 7 out of 10. It's probably 6 or 7 out of 10 on any of those days. And again, there's literally no stress at how slow or fast it is. It's purely just getting in the miles, ticking them over, and enjoying those days. And so what a typical week might look like is, I like to have those, I would say that long steadier session is kind of my keystone. And I usually do that on Saturday morning. So I think about my week, and then Sunday is the other very important thing. Is Sunday is my like absolute super easy recovery day. Sometimes that's just not even running. And for a lot of people, I might recommend like not running. And I would say actually for the first half of this training block, I wasn't running on Sundays. I was just running 6 days a week. So what that looks like for me is Monday, steady, easy, relaxed running. Tuesday, interval session. Wednesday, steady, easy running. Thursday, another interval session. Friday, steady, easy running. Saturday, long, steady session. Sunday, dog easy, super relaxed. And then I might, again, those 2 sessions, say like the Tuesday, Thursday, one of them might be intervals on the track. And then one of them will probably be what I like to call unstructured sessions. And that might be hill repeats, might be fartlek, might even be one of my favorite workouts is like called the unstructured fartlek, where it's literally like, I'm going to go out for 30 minutes and just in the pure essence of the fartlek, speed play, just mess around with speed. If that's sprinting for 50 meters, I'll do that, back off. If that's then this next time going and running at what feels like 10K pace, just see if I can hold it for a few minutes, never looking at my watch, never anything, like purely just playing with speed. So that's something that again, I kind of like to balance if I'm doing 2 sessions in the week, one of structure and one of less rigid structure. And then sometimes, some weeks, I might only do like 1 session and just do some steady running on the other day. So, yeah.
And so you're coming back from this injury. So what did the buildup look like? Or And maybe you could even talk to how you would modify this if you were actively still injured, or what kind of baseline fitness would you need before you started entering into a specific training plan like this, where your weeks are more regimented, and how long do you think that training cycle leading up to an ultra should be?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I kind of had a little bit of, okay, yeah. So I I would say I spent about a year and a half of basically not running well, up until this year. And it was actually the day after I turned in my dissertation, I went for my first run of the year, and that was in March, the beginning of March.
Yeah.
And I hadn't run since the beginning of December, of the previous year. And then even any of the running that I was doing before that was very much like not at all. It was bad, and that's a whole other conversation. But after I started in March, I actually, because I had taken so long away, but also had taken that time to fundamentally correct and address issues within myself, I started running, and I built up really well and really quickly with no issues. And I kept thinking the whole time, something's going to go wrong. This has been too good, because I built up with, after having not run for over 3 months a step, I was starting to run 80, 90 miles a week within less than a month, back to my old, feeling great doing it. And I was
I got to pause you here, because now I'm really curious. What were those fundamental things? Because that's a big part of what we are, trying to preach. What were those fundamental things you addressed that you felt like once you did that, you were better able to progress and maybe quicker without susceptibility?
Yeah, I would say lower back mobility, core, lower core pelvic strength.
Yeah.
Those were the two big things. A little bit of arm strength. So basically trunk mobility and strength. And that is that's just it in spades, because what ends up happening is once those things go, you just start making compensations all over, and then you get your injuries happen, not anywhere in here, but because the conductor of the orchestra is not leading the charge very well. So anyways, I think it was really the lower back, mobility, and kind of lower abdominal core strength. Those were the two most important things, because that was a lot of the issues had started to become nerve issues that I just could not move well.
Yeah.
Then the other one was addressing ankle mobility and calf strength on my left side that had kind of really deteriorated over a year of disuse. Yeah. So kind of taking a lot of time to not run at all, but just get those things spot on. Once I started running again, I was oh my gosh, this feels like me a couple years ago. So I started building up quickly, and then I sprained my ankle, and this was I think in May. And I kind of saw that as the thing coming, because I think that was one of the areas of just some underdeveloped muscles and ligaments that were just waiting to be exploited. And so that went, and that knocked me off my feet for a couple weeks, and had to kind of wait for that to calm down and then start the strengthening on the peroneals there. But then once I started building back up again, it was kind of I kind of had a couple 2 months of primer fitness that gave me the confidence that I could kind of lay a couple weeks of rebuilding and then start maybe doing more structure, the typical structured training. So getting back to kind of your original question of how long before an ultra marathon. So my ideal buildup, I like, and this speaks of any project, not just running, but any work project or anything like that. Yeah. I like to see where you want to be and then work backwards from it. Yep. And so I think of race day. leading into race day, I would like to have about a 3-week taper from kind of peak volume. So then we go back 3 weeks. Leading into that taper down, I'd like to log minimally 8 weeks, but ideally maybe 10 weeks of really good, like higher volume training. So now you're looking at like 12 to 13 weeks prior to race day of preparation. And then to get to that like big chunk of volume, I think that then depends on a lot of factors how you get to that. There have been times where I had that training cycle, took time off after the race, and then moved back into things like relatively easily and was able to really dive right back into one of those kind of higher volume sessions. This time, I think I had about a 4-week block leading into that higher mileage to build up to it. But had I just continued straight through, that may have been, maybe more appropriately could have been in 8-week block of like slowly building up. And what that looks like now for me is it may be maybe a broader 8-week, not out of, more out of like that. I look at that 8 to 10 week block as like the dedicated important training block. Yeah. And everything you do, you want to time that correctly with relation to the race. So then everything you do before that. And so if that needs to be condensed for any reason, for injury, or anything else, I think minimally like 4 weeks at higher volume before backing down, would probably be adequate. Because I think one of the things that's important for that long volume of training is not necessarily big adaptations you're going to make. You'll make some adaptations ideally if you train correctly. Yeah. But more broadly, it's actually just important to operate in a state of being fatigued for that long, because this gets to that notion of like how you can specifically prepare for an ultra marathon, because you can't like, I don't go out and run for 6 hours. But what you can do, if every week you're doing a 2-hour session with some of it at quicker paces, having already run a lot of miles that week and having already run a lot of miles for the last 4 or 5 plus weeks, then you really start to develop both the physical and psychological abilities to operate in that fatigued state. And so that's one of the biggest ways that I get at preparing for an ultra marathon, is that idea of like, in a mechanical engineering sense, we would say preloading the material. That is, really load it up and then do the test on it. So preload with volume.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think your point about, hey, it's really going to depend on your individual attributes and your experience. If this is your first ultra, like 12 weeks might not be enough. You might need a longer time to get an adaptation period. I think one of the interesting things, we're filming this kind of during all the COVID chaos. I think because there's been so fewer races, people have had more time to train for races, and they've been able to do a more steady, gradual, and even get exactly like you were talking about into some of those fatigue longer states. Yeah. And not only are they getting more physiological adaptations, but the mental aspect is improving from some of that, and they can spread out a training plan, because you don't have the next race, the next race, the next race. Yeah. You're really focusing on one race, which I've seen a lot of PRs for the races that people are able to do happening this year.
Yeah. And that's something that I would like, I think it's a trap that a lot of people fall into, is jumping from race to race. And right now, to your point, we are like constrained in that you can't do that. So you're kind of forced to isolate it. And I think that's really important, because really nailing a good race is truly, you can, and I would encourage people to do this. Like, you can race in that, like that 8 to 10 week training block is not necessarily going out, you know, to the top of the mountain and training by yourself, like, and then coming down for the race. It can be that. I do that a lot, and it works for me. But I also, if you have the opportunity, like those Saturday, like those Saturday, you know, those Saturday long sessions, a lot of times if I want to race, I might do a long warm up, race a 10K or a 5K on the roads, and then do a long, hard cool down or something like that.
Right.
Like you can mix it in, because it's definitely healthy to race within that period. But if you really want to nail something, I think it's helpful to only have a couple per year that you really focus and gear up for. And otherwise you're just stale. And so I think to your point, it's like we have like imposed scarcity right now, which could be a healthy thing for people.
I've used an analogy of like those Fast and Furious movies, right? Because there's like 25 of them now.
Yeah.
But where they always hit the button with the nitrous oxide. Like, I think you can tap into that only once every 3 or 4 months.
Yep.
And it takes a long time to fill that back up. And if you're always draining that by racing all the time at your limits, you're going to go to hit the button when it matters most, and it's just going to be empty.
That's exactly it. That's 100% it. And that's what we were talking before this about, how right now I'm in the recovery period. And for me, the recovery is not physiological and mechanical. Like I'm there. It's psychological and emotional, because it's that, like, it's one of those things where if you really want to nail a race, you have to, part of the preparation is orchestrating the importance, the emotional intensity of it, so that you can hit NOS on race day, and have it there when you need it. And like you said, you can't go to that very frequently. Even people who race high volume, like one of my favorite athletes of the last decade, you know, is Yuki Kawauchi. He's a Japanese marathoner. He, you know, a lot of Americans might know him because he won Boston in 2018. But he was famous for being this like high volume racer. He'd race, you know, 12 marathons a year, but they're all like quite faster than most professional Americans could even run. You know, he'd be running, you know, 210 to 212 12 times a year, which is crazy. But then in between all of those marathons, he was racing half marathons and road races, everything, like racing over 40 times a year, which is absurd. But even him, who raced that frequently, he still had like 3 or 4 races a year that he really gunned for. Right. So he's still like, he was racing 12 marathons, but of those, 3 of them were like the ones that he was using the other ones to prepare for. So I think even in, you know, you can race as much as you want, but it's like you can only attach profound emotional importance to like a couple a year and build and recover appropriately.
I think that's a great point. So, maybe talk us through a little bit what the last couple days, weeks have been since the race, and you know, when did you first run, or what's your what's your splurge? What's your, like, at the end of a 50 miler, do you go just crush like a pizza, or like what's your celebration after something like that?
I would say it probably changes each build. This year was I mean, I just love eating like all things. Like baked goods this year were kind of number one, like croissants. We have like at our farmers market, there's a one of the vendors is like a French artisan baker and just makes incredible croissants. So I've given them a lot of business over the last 2 weeks. But no, that's actually something that I would say. So it's actually very important after, especially an ultra marathon, actually to eat a lot, because you essentially put your metabolism into overdrive for an entire day. And so I think it's really, really important to eat especially a lot of protein and fats, like after the race. And this isn't like, this is independent of any diet that anybody follows, whether it's carbohydrate,
keto,
high fat, low fat, whatever.
Right.
I think protein and fat is very important after an ultra marathon for, rebuild. You essentially just put yourself in a state of injury.
Yeah.
And so you need to rebuild all that muscle. And then the fat is really good because you just burned through a lot of fat. And so it's something that's vital to your body's kind of functioning, that if you tapped into any stores wherever in your body, that you kind of, you get it back into, you take it out of energy deficit.
Right.
So anyway, so in the days after an ultra marathon, I'm eating a lot of cakes and pastries just because they're delicious.
Because why not, right? Hey, that's a great reason.
So I stayed at an inn at the race, and the innkeeper, she was just like a tremendous baker. And so so this is the one thing that's one of my favorite things to just go all in. And it sounds very simple. It's like bread and butter and jam. There's something that is, I think we and maybe for the best part, when you have the option of having toast in the morning or something like that, we inevitably go easy on the butter and maybe easy on the jam. Cause you don't want, but after a race, you go heavy on butter and heavy on jam. I think a simple piece of really good bread with a lot of butter and a lot of jam beats the pants off any pastry. So anyways, they baked their own bread. So I'd go through each morning after the race, I'd go through half the loaf of her homemade jam and homemade bread, and just oh yeah, this is the life. Just enjoying the bread and butter simply. So anyways, that, but also after a race, I'll try and eat an enormous steak, just some massive amount of protein.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's something that's really important. But then just kind of enjoying all of the things that I would not eat liberally.
During the training cycle, you maybe keep the pastries lower. Yeah.
So croissants ad infinitum the last couple of weeks, and pie. Pie is the other one that at this time of year is nice to enjoy. So that's the couple weeks after the race is I would say for a week after the race, again, kind of just I don't run at all, and so that's really important. I would say this would qualify that. What I think is also really important, the day after the race, my legs are just destroyed. I will go out the first thing in the morning when I wake up. I will go out and walk jog for about 20 minutes and try and get in 5 to 10 minutes of running, not consecutively, but run for a minute or two at a time, run for a minute or two at a time. Feels awful, but it is so good for recovery because loading your ligaments and muscles above body weight, those structures are very mechanosensitive to that loading, and just 10 minutes of loading is enough to stimulate all of those anabolic pathways to start the rebuilding process. So I think doing that throughout the week, again, not starting your Garmin and going out and logging a run, no, just
continuous, just
going out for a walk and try and get in 10 minutes of loading above body weight. And so that's really important that I do as well. And that speeds up the recovery process, but I think it also irons out the recovery process. And that if you think of your muscles being just a ravaged battlefield, it again facilitates the cleanup. So you don't have, I suspect it helps you from not having kind of whether it's uneven scar tissue kind of, strewn throughout there. Again, just gets the rebuilding going cleanly. So I do that throughout the week. And again, the day after the race, it's really important.
Yeah, you guys hear that healing happens in optimal stress, not the absence of stress. So if you get that right amount, that's going to really put you in. That's a good point. I really like that plan.
And so, it's like the day after the race, because it was actually funny. As I was coming off the trail at mile 15 and my legs were just giving out from under me, and I was thinking I feel like I just did I just feel like I just spent a couple hours in the gym deadlifting to failure. I was thinking, I was like, oh man, 2 days from now, this is going to be hell. Like I can feel that eccentric damage that I just ripped my legs apart. And sure enough, yeah, the next couple days. But that was one of the things that I think offsets that is like, it was so painful to go like, I wouldn't even call it, it would be a pitiful demonstration of running because it was like, it looked like my gait had aged like 70 years, just like doing it. But I think it was so good it was like pulling a tooth.
Yeah.
So it was good to do. So that's what, in terms of recovery, the first week, occasional bouts of that, like very short periods of walk jogging, but no real running or anything. It's that like getting back to that sensation of like enjoying life without having the stress of training. And yeah, eating a lot, like enjoying lots of things. Oh, the other thing that's like my big pleasure is I'm a huge wine geek. Like I absolutely love wine, and I kind of like phase it out of my diet as my training gets heavier and heavier, partially because I'm like, I think in training or anything, we kind of like have to optimize, like your liver is the orchestrator of everything, like recovery, all of those things. And I'm like, want to de-stress the liver as much as possible. So wine is one of the early things that gets like taken out. So re-explore the grapes in these last couple weeks. So that's a nice thing to have. And that'll be there. That'll persist with meals, I think, through until heavy training starts again. But anyways, so a week of just enjoying life is not training heavily. And then like this week, like the last week of getting back into running, and what will probably continue for maybe at least a month, is just running literally whatever I want, however I feel, like with friends, as like I call it like casual running. Like what does it feel like to just run for exercise and fitness and not for any specific preparation? No stress, just fitting it in whenever is convenient. Yeah. And so that's what period I'm in now. And all of that is about maintaining a level of, maintaining kind of baseline fitness, and not letting it decline, and maintaining mechanical ability to train, again, without letting that decline, but recharging myself emotionally and psychologically. So,
I think that's huge. Yeah. Your brain is going to tell you when you're ready to run.
Exactly. I always tell people, like, whenever you've finished a race and have like a rest period, don't run until you crave running again.
Yeah.
And then wait a day. Better yet, wait 2 days. And so get to that point. And honestly, that's kind of how it was for like 4 or 5 days after the race. I was like, I don't want to think about running at all. But then by the weekend, I was like, should I go for a run today? I could. But then I'm like, nope. Like that's the point. That's the point where I'm considering it. Now wait 2 days.
I think that's because those 2 days in the grand scheme of thing aren't going to make or break your fitness. Nope. But if you get injured in those 2 days and you miss the next 2 months, that will have a big impact on your fitness.
And that's what, I have one of my best friends is he's a professional cyclist, and they have their season's very unique in that it's kind of like the NCAA season in that it's like 8 to 9 months of kind of pretty steady racing, and then they have a big off period. And one of the things that I was telling, like we were talking about how to structure his 3 months away, like how much of that is completely off the bike, how much of it is just casual riding, how much of it is starting to train again. One of the things I like to say is like you have to get to the end of this 3 months ready to train hard and race for 9 more months. Yeah. So take if you have any hesitation or any like resistance to training or anything at this point, stop and back off. And again, I think it's very analogous to running, because like you have to get to the point where once you start training again, you can't go back and rest.
Right. Yeah. Then the clock, the ball is rolling. You've got milestones to hit with that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Geoff, this is awesome. Thank you. Every
Yeah.
time we talk, I always learn a ton, and this was definitely a highlight of that. So, really appreciate you sharing about the race and some of your training pearls and recovery pearls. You know, where can people find more from you if they want to kind of get more information or find out more stuff? Where can they?
Yeah. So I have a website that's just jeffreyburns.com that I link to my scientific publications there, as well as kind of any, whether it's podcasts or interviews do. And then I have Twitter and Instagram are just, my full name, Jeffrey Burns. And I was off Twitter for a while, but kind of recently maybe started to get back on. So I kind of infrequently on and off that. And then on Instagram, I'll update with, kind of training, racing stuff. And then also, this might be of interest, I'm on Strava now as well. I hadn't used it for a long time. And then actually for the start of this, once I started rebuilding for this, I had thought, I'm like, I hadn't used Strava before, not out of like looking down or thinking negatively on it. I think it's an incredible platform. I always just kind of liked keeping my running to myself, of not having any sort of like knowledge or thought of an observer effect on what I was doing.
Yeah.
And it was also, that was coupled with the tension of wanting to share what I do, and whether that's inspiring or informing other people, or or just feeling that connection. So I finally thought, I'm like, okay, you just get over yourself on that front and, put it on there. And I've been loving that. Like that was, like I said, I kind of pulled away from Twitter and Instagram for a little bit, but that's been the social network that I find most interest in. So
all the people are upset though that you're stealing all their KOMs and things like that. Yeah. They probably wanted you to stay off Strava locally just for that, but the rest of us are benefiting.
Yeah, well, hopefully, maybe. I was gonna say, because as I alluded to, I'm very liturgical in my route choices. That I like, the heavier and heavier my training gets, the more and more repetitive I get. So I certainly have the new local legend. I think I have a few of those, like in untouchable quantities.
Yeah.
But
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we'll copy it all. We'll put all that in the notes and things so people can get a hold of you. But thank you again, and good luck with your next training cycle, and enjoy all the pastries and pie and wine until that next one starts.
Yeah, will do. We'll not have problems with that. But yeah, thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Awesome. Thanks, Geoff.